It's ad break time. The Beyond Solitaire podcast is proudly sponsored by Central Michigan University's Center for Learning Through Games and Simulations. And as usual, they are up to some amazing things. They recently concluded a successful campaign on Backer Kit for Eyeball to Eyeball, a LARP about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Late pledges should be available soon. CLGS is also still offering a certificate in applied game design, and the next class is going to be It's All in the Cards, designing card and card-driven games, taught by Damon Stone. He is a brilliant teacher, and his students absolutely love him, so you should sign up. The course starts on August 26th. But for now, I'm super happy to be here for Season 9. Let's get on with the show. Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm back with the Beyond Solitaire podcast with a favorite returning guest, Non-Breaking Space. He is a man of mystery, so we're not doing any video of this podcast, and we're not using real names, but we are talking about real games. How you doing, NB?
I'm doing good. Trying to do as best as I can in a hot July of 2024.
I am not feeling hot this July because I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I'm so happy.
Oh, yeah, for July, sure.
we can try this again in February.
See how you feel.
All right.
It's beautiful as well, but then you get
I'm looking forward to a weather adventure here. But the last time I had you on the podcast, I had you on to talk about Cross Brockton Expressway. I am really looking forward to that game hitting my table. I know everyone hates this question, but how long do you think it's going to be before we see it at this point?
So I really cannot control the actual production timeline, but I think where we are right now is we're getting the rules laid out. We have like the covers being worked on, but it's just all like the final little bits of art that we're putting together to bring it into a final package. And then it should go to print sometime this year. And hopefully we can do it in a fashion that gets it back, if not end of this year, early next year.
Excellent. I am very hopeful this is the case because I can't wait. But you've got other really good game projects going. So you're in a World War II phase.
Oh, I'm in a World War phase, actually, which is probably appropriate for the times. But World War II is what's coming next. It was technically, I'll tell you this, technically, it wasn't my first choice. I've got another design on World War I, which I thought was going to come first. But then I started showing the World War II game around, and everybody just was like, that's the one. That's the one. So, Solitaire Attack Ops Ortona. It's coming out from GNT Games, or it's on P500 right now from GNT Games. And it is about the December 1943 campaign of the 1st Canadian Infantry in Italy. They were basically doing the campaign to Ortona. And so this is a game that's a mix of the operational and tactical scale, hence called TAC Ops, that basically takes you over the course of the whole campaign. And sees you move from where the Canadians came in at the Moral River all the way up to take the town. And it's a study sort of effectiveness through urban combat. And I'm heavy into it right now. I started doing one of the things that happened over the pandemic is like there was a lot of shift to digital prototyping.
Yeah.
And I think that still is retained. Like there's still like everybody learned like, oh my gosh, you can do so many things really quickly on the digital prototyping tip. But I always before had did print and play kits and built print and play versions of my games. And then I guess what happened with digital, which not even print and play, I shouldn't even say print and play. Like I would just make my own games, So like I'd have a bunch of pieces of paper, I draw out a map, I cut some pieces of paper and stuff like that, and like just would make them myself, using like pieces from other games and stuff like that. And then the whole pandemic thing happened and this whole digital wave came around, and it's like, oh, well, now we're making like designs of the games and playing them in this digital space, and you can iterate and make as many versions of it as you want. You can play it with people all over the world and test it as much as you want, have them playing it and everything like that. And I think it really revolutionized the way that games are being made today in that sense. But from that and through like Cross Bronx, maybe Cross Bronx wasn't the first one, but somewhere along that line, I started printing games that I had designed and getting them like printed up in physical copies. And I've got to say, like, as soon as I print a game, it just kind of is bad because all the digital stuff is over. I never want to go back to the digital version. So like right now I have a version of Solitaire Tac Ops that I've been just sort of loving so much. But the Vassal and the TTS mods are like versions behind, because I'm like, I don't really want to. Why am I wasting time trying to fix a Vassal mod when I could just be playing it again? Right?
I mean, you have a point. So, what sparked the interest in Ortona?
Well, I spent some time in Canada over a decade ago, and while I was up there, that's where I learned how to play euchre. I have a long background in trick-taking games, and trick-taking games may have been my first like love for games. May have come out of that from like hearts and spades and bid whist. And so when I was up in Canada, I hooked up with a few friends, and some of them, like a bunch of them, were loggers, and they had a euchre game, and we play euchre like every week. And you know, those are the type of games that are really around like socializing. Like you're just coming together and drink a bunch of beers, play some euchre, talk some shit. And so in the course of talking shit, it would naturally always come up about, Canadians versus Americans, and how Americans steal the thunder of all the great things that Canadians have done as well. And so in World War II, of course, is a big part of that discussion. And so that's where I learned about Ortona. It was just like, it was this, larger than life type of a story of like Canadian resilience that I had to just learn more about. And as I learned more and more about it, it's like, oh my gosh, this really actually is a pretty amazing effort. And so as I was thinking about games, I mean, the way that I sort of do and think about games is really just like topics of study. And you sort of look at what the scholarship is about a thing, right? And if you read academics, there's a lot of like, dare I say, posturing that happens around, these opinions over here and these opinions over there and this, that. And so you can either take everybody's word for it or pick a side or something along those lines, but also you can utilize the ideology to sort of build models that sort of reflect what those things are, right? And so that's what I see games as, sort of like means of just investigating a topic and really understanding the dynamics that were at play and how they like came into formation, and doing so in an interactive way, being able to give players the opportunity to experience those dynamics through challenging choices. And so topic wise, like I said, the World War I came beforehand, because I've been really on this kick around what is the military, and what does it do? Which sounds like, okay.
No, I mean, that's a legit question though.
Right? Like, I mean, it's one of those things we don't really think about. And I think it's particularly like, if you don't have a history, if you don't come from a military family, you don't think about it from that. And even if you do, I mean, actually, a lot of the times when you do, you just don't think about, okay, what is this thing? And especially in peace times, you just sort of think of it as an ancillary thing if you're outside of it. And then in war times, you start thinking of it as an almost essential thing, right? And there's no, I don't know, this is just, I'm gonna say, I'm speaking in general terms, but I'm just talking for me. Like there's no real reconciliation of meaning that happens in between, because there's no in between of those phases, right? And so yeah, and looking at that question and looking at what is this history of war and what is it that's come about, I mean, that's sort of like a part of it at the core for me has been thinking through like how modernity drives that, and how like the quest for modernity is the driver behind all of these sort of points of conflict. So that's what Cross Bronx Expressway is really about, how this drive for modernity is the crux of the conflict that it creates on the population, right? And war is like the huge, big manifestation of that. So my study of war led to like, okay, well, what does it mean? Like, what happens? And how is this a reflection of, because this is, or really it's like the deconstruction of the myth, because we think about like the myth of like the great nations and how it's the will of the people, or the will of the might of the nation that sort of is the driving force, right? Which is this idealized version of the military power of a country. But there's actual like physical things that happen. Like this is a physical thing that's happening, that's war. It's not just like a kapoosh, everything we decided and it doesn't happen. And when you have wars that go for the duration that they go, it's like, okay, what happens? And we've had the sort of privilege in the civilian society of the United States of not having to deal with not necessarily having to deal so deep with the impacts of war in that way. And so we can think about it from this distance. And that sort of shapes how we perceive it as well, because we can talk about it at this distance, even when we're talking about our own involvement from it. Ooh, I'm going on a big long tangent, but I bring it back. The thing about World War One is that it's the big modern shift, right? Huge modern shift happens in World War One, and it's around machine gun fire, entrenchments. Everybody knows big entrenchments, and it creates a stalemate, and we just can't move. And I'm not going to talk about. I could go on about that for a long. I'm trying to just move beyond that because that's not the game that I'm talking about. But but trust me, if you want to get me talking again, just let's talk World War One for a bit. But the next mode of that in World War II is this other sort of type of warfare, which is really like the lessons that were learned in World War One really weren't completely applied in World War One. There were parts of them that were utilized, but by the time that like they cohered into a doctrinal practice, World War One was over, and that doctrinal practice wasn't able to sort of manifest itself or become realized until World War Two. And at that time, a whole other shift happens and it goes. So urban warfare itself is one of those big shifts, because prior to World War II, there was urban warfare, but it's sort of thought about as this sort of siege. When we talk about sieges, that's like the notion of, well, war moves to a big town or city, and then there's a siege, right? And
Yeah.
but when you get to World War II, it's still a siege, but it's completely different. And Ortona is sort of like, and it represents the level of difference that's going to happen in the future, right? And this is sort of the thing that draws Ortona, what we're seeing in Ortona, what we see in Ortona, to what we're seeing today. And that's a really dark thing to say, but let's just like not beat around the bush with that, right? And so Ortona is about effectiveness, and how can you be effective in this radically different context of fighting the war. And so like by the time the Canadians get there, there's barely any like writing around how you conduct warfare in a city or in an urban environment. There's a few references, and like there's papers that are being, or the documents that are being written by the British that actually refer to things that the Canadians hadn't read yet, and they're going to put into practice in Ortona, right? And so they're coming into this without necessarily being trained for this environment, but having to use everything that they've gotten along the way and apply it to this new type of environment. And the big core of it is you have to learn in the process, and learning in the process can be really, really brutal. Right. And in the war context, when you have to learn on the ground, it can get really brutal. And Ortona, what it represents overall is this modern shift in how to fight war, in the most like, I almost want to say not atypical, but more, it's so unique of a setting of how it occurs. And that in that, like, this is a foreign nation, right? Neither the Canadians or the Germans are in their home territory. So, right, to begin with, the Germans have occupied the area for a while, but they aren't necessarily revered. So there's a civilian population that's been occupied in this space, right? But a lot of them have had plenty of time to get out of the town. So the people that are there, there's people that are there, but a lot of them have already evacuated. So and there's been that time to sort of say evacuate the town, so that the town itself is like a sandbox, and is treated like a sandbox for this type of warfare from both the German perspective and from the Canadians' perspective around how, and then that engagement sort of happens in this space. And it's just like really intense and really sort of lays down the lines of what the doctrinal changes that would come after it, or how those are learned and on the ground in the scenarios. Sorry, that was a long-winded way of answering your question, but that's like at the core what drove me to this is a bunch of loggers in Canada saying, yeah, we could fight better than the Americans.
But they do it nicely because they're Canadian. That's that's
they're actually really good about it.
no, that's super interesting. And then I guess, listening to you, to how, I guess, how deep your thought process is about why you're doing what you're doing, and what you're trying to express. What makes games in particular the best way to think through and then communicate your conclusions about topics like these?
Mm. Well, I think I have to be honest and say that still remains to be seen, because I think I'm able to communicate, but it's really a matter of how you all as the players regard it. And I think part of the way that I'm approaching games and how it is that I'm going at this whole thing is really putting out a call to the players to say, will you engage on this on its terms? I think and this is like, I think Liz, I'm a pretty hardcore gamer. I love to game, but I don't necessarily make the games that I love to play per se, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say that. I love to play a lot of games, and I make games that fit into a corner of those games. But there's a lot of other games that I love to play that are not the games that I want to make, right?
Yeah.
And so the reason that I want to make games is, like I was saying, for this investigation and sharing this investigation with players. Is this something that you're interested in investigating too? Like, are you wondering what is military power and how is that reflected when you get into an urban scenario, right? Like, does that like tickle your fancy? But, but if you are prepared to engage at that level, I think like I want to like go deep, and I want to have like really deep engaging discussions about the topic, having investigated the topic through the game, right? And that's sort of what the designs are there for. It's like, hey, are you interested in like the nitty gritty of what was going on in the Bronx during the 70s and maybe even before and after that? Then I've got the game for you. But you better want to like really get into it, because it's gonna make you that's what I want. I want to spark that discussion and keep that discussion going. about the topic itself almost more than about the game, right? I want you engaged with the history as much as I want you engaged with the game. And that's, I think it's not necessarily new, but I kind of like I'm unapologetic about that. It makes like developers hate me, but love you, Joe.
Oh, but you got a good one. Joe's a great developer.
Yeah. But I think like the bet that I'm making is that one, a lot of people actually do, and two, that it will create a demand, or that there's an untapped demand for it because people don't ask for it enough. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I do, and I think that it's always interesting to talk about games in this way because I mean I think you and I are on the same page in that we want games to be able to do more and to lead to more than just yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
But we're also in a community that claims a large portion of it will claim that that's all they want, and so that is a risk to like be inviting more.
Yeah.
Because it's you. I think with any art you make, though, you can't control how people are going to engage with it.
You can't.
It'd be just as true of a painting or a symphony or a book.
And it's like I don't want all games to be this, and like that's sort of the flip side. Is like, yes, games have this wide spectrum of situations that there's a game for, right? And I want there to be a game for this type of experience as well. That's what I'm saying. And so but at the same time, that doesn't mean like we don't have fun and we don't like make enjoyable, like laughable, like laughing moments. That's a core part of it as well, But if the high level mechanics of the game is measured higher than, or not measured higher, but if the attention is sort of left to just the high level mechanics of the game, then a lot is being lost and a lot is being missed. And I really like hope that at least to some degree, that's what I mean. Like, are you willing to engage with the game on its level? It's like to some degree you have to come in with that level of expectation that, okay, I'm doing more than just figuring out how to win this game.
Nice. And also speaking of World War stuff, you and I now share a co-designer.
Yeah.
David Thompson. So I had David on forever ago to talk about the Fifth Platoon. I'm so happy it's like in progress and that it's with you. So from your perspective, how is that process going?
I mean, David is great. I don't know, like probably he deserves an award, and I'm not sure who's gonna give him this award or how to give him it. Maybe we just have to give him this award, but he is without a doubt the grindiest designer in the industry. And a lot of times when you sort of think about that context, like from the outside, you think about that and you're just like, oh yeah, he's just sort of churning out games or working on like trust me, I've got a lot of games, but I'm always like, what's that you're working on? Are you working on that too? And you got that too? Like Dave is like unbelievable. But it isn't until getting to like actually work and collaborate with him to just really like see the level of depth that he goes. And it's just amazing. Like I just love the experience overall. So the Fifth Platoon is going to be awesome, not because of what I'm bringing to it, but because of like the passion and the love that he brings to the design process. It's just great to feed off of and just like vibe off of. And we're just like, yeah, it's in a good place. I'm really happy about it. And we're going to get to another one where there's a digital version, but I've only like done the digital version. So I haven't really played the digital version because I've been waiting. We're going to do a physical test at Gen Con, which I'm happy to finally do.
Yeah, honestly, if I can get in on that at some point, I would be absolutely delighted.
Yeah, it's like, it's great. It's absolutely great. And so I'm really looking forward to how that comes alive.
Definitely. Also, you and I are going to have to do something so we can like balance this triangle.
Oh, there's plenty of topics, Liz,
Oh, man. All right. So speaking of Gen Con, you've got an interesting project coming up that I'm going to participate in. And then I actually might debrief about this on YouTube because maybe we can do a stream where you don't come on camera. But you're doing a really interesting way of engaging with John Company.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
what are we doing?
So I blame Steven Rangazas for this because I don't know if this is also worth noting. It's just like me and Steven have sort of partnered up around this sort of studio idea and have been just running like madmen for the last couple of years. And he had this sort of whole thing around hybrid board games where you take a board game or like, if I think you've probably played a Matrix game, Liz,
Yeah.
or even like the reacting games where there's this like these role-playing games, then there's like these Matrix games, the reacting to the past type of games, which are all have this sort of narrative base, and then there's board games which have this sort of mechanical base. And Matrix games kind of get like try and bridge that a little bit, but there's still just so like there's a loose mechanical framework with a narrative that can be rich or deep, however, layer on top of it. And so he had this notions that starting from the base of a board game and then doing a hybrid sort of narrative role-playing aspect on top of it could be like it sort of adds this other layer that allows for the value of like lessons that come out of it to be enriched. And so that was just sort of theoretical. He pulled together this one session that, oh my gosh, I'm so like, I can't even talk about in too deep, but he pulled together this one session. Actually, out of respect, I'm not going to talk about what it was, of a really old game, but it was amazing. And so I'm like, yeah, hybrid games, like hybrid games. And we started just going back and forth on like, what are all the games that would be good situationally to create this hybrid format for. And John Company was one of the ones that were on that list. And so I went and created these rules a while ago. And I tell Cole, I'm like, Cole, I got these rules for this RPG. And I don't know, I don't know like the whole process in terms of like putting it out. I didn't even know if I necessarily wanted to put it out. It was just really more in terms of like I wanted to be able to see what the experience of adding this layer of role playing on top of the game of John Company could bring about to enrich the experience, right? And so I'm
Yeah.
talking to Cole about it, and um I'm just like, there's only one way to do this because I don't want to like, it's not one of those games where I'm like, oh, I want to refine this and make a releasable copy. It's more about I want to create this experience and see what happens with the experience. And so I'm like, yeah, the only way we're gonna do this is if like there's a Gen Con event for it. And so silly me, last year, whenever it was open, I'm like, all right, let me just put it in and see what happens. And lo and behold, I hadn't made plans to go to Gen Con or anything like that. I'm just like, yeah, just put it in because that's the only way that like to force it to happen, especially like with all the things on my plate. The only way to like force this thing to happen was to put it on a Gen Con schedule and say, okay, it's happening. Let's see how we do. And so that's how it really came together. But overall, the experience is going to be, I mean, it may have happened by the time we get to this, but yeah, the experience is going to be absolutely amazing because it really just sort of takes the thesis that Cole had around the game, which because of the scale that the game operates, you don't really get to investigate too deeply, right? Because the game is centered around this idea of every player representing a family, and you're taking family actions over a century. And in the game context, turn to turn, you don't necessarily have to reflect too hard about that, though like the best sort of banter at the table usually comes out of that context of the familial context. And so the layer that I've added on top of it just really dives into investigating who's in those families and what are they actually experiencing through the actions that you're taking in the game. So I'm really excited for it. I'm so glad that you're going to be joining us, Liz, for it because it's one of those one of a kind experiences that this is what I kind of live for, this type of thing.
No, I mean, you asked me to do it, and like honestly, I would pretty much just do whatever you asked me to do because I know it's going to lead somewhere interesting. But
Yeah.
so how? Okay, the families in John Company are not exactly like stellar people who are
Mhm.
like doing good things in the world.
Mm-hmm.
How is the RPG going to reflect that? And to what extent are we going to be, I guess, feeling like we're acting like real shitheads?
So I think that's the dual edge of the game itself, right? Is that
Yeah.
Cole, I think to some degree, is like acknowledging the fact that everybody that you're playing in the game is to some degree like responsible for absolute shit, right? And they are responsible, and they should be accountable for that. But in the context of the game, they have motivations, and the game is asking you to take on those motivations, and it's doing it in games terms, which means that it's sort of mechanicalized, and then there's heuristics behind the mechanics that connect you to the actions, right? But like I said, it separates you from the family because the family is sort of only just the pieces that you put out, right? Your family pieces are out there. And so when you like, by example, the chairman is an actual piece and represents one of your family members is now the chairman. In the game, on the high level, you never name that, but in the RPG, you're going to give the chairman a name and put them and lay them out on your family tree. And over the course of the game, your family tree is going to evolve. And so you'll be able to see who was related to who and what was the true impact of your family in this time. And layered on top of that is a level of communication between or in the families and between the families that sort of brings out a narrative layer of what's happening turn to turn, that is at the level of those individual family members. So yeah, I don't know. It's one of those.
Oh, I'm excited about this.
So I think to your question was like, will you actively see them as pieces of shit? No, but you may, or there won't be like, oh, here's the piece of evidence. It'll more be like, oh, I now get the context, and that's pretty shitty.
Oh man, the thing that makes an RPG interesting, right? Is it so, John Company is about really heavy issues, a really heavy time in history. It's trying to sensitively but accurately treat something that, I mean, the East India Company was full of people who did terrible things. Maybe they didn't see themselves as terrible day to day, but the impact was bad. But a
Mhm.
board game kind of makes that a little bit more abstract, right? Like, yeah,
Mhm.
you're moving the pieces around, but since we're moving into an RPG, like I like the idea of doing it as families, but you're just more emotionally in it,
Mhm. Oh
and
yeah,
so that's what I'm really curious about feeling.
I mean, I think this is one of those things that like I'd say current wave of video games, because I've come from Pac-Man days, right? But the narrative wave of video games where their character ties, you build character ties. Like movies have always done it, but I think the video game sort of RPG, even like in FPS, like in random whatever game, you'll have these NPCs or other characters or your own character that you'll have these sort of emotional attachments to that are becoming these proxies where you're choosing their actions as well, or they're reacting to what you're doing. And I think this is one of the things that in the board game setting, it's the same, it has the same level of weight, as long as, but I think what happens in board games is the mechanics of it are so visible that there's the opportunity to put this barrier up and not even look at it. Whereas in a video game, because all the mechanics are sort of hidden, you sort of are immediately more immersed into it. In an RPG, right, there's no layers at all. You are the character, and so you're deeply immersed into it. You're asked to immerse yourself into it. So finding that balance, to be able to tell those stories is really what the mediums are really doing. It's amazing.
So how up on the rules of board game John Company will we need to be to engage with the RPG? Like, is it is it like the game with an extra layer on top, or is it something that's inspired by the game, but it's got its own kind of way of existing in the game world?
It's definitely the game with the RPG on top, and everybody should just be playing John Company like they would normally play John Company. There'll just be RPG interrupts in between, or like asides in between, and it's not necessarily. The real goal for me is to like run it in a way that doesn't pause the game, but just sort of is like moving on all fronts. And that way, but I mean, this is the beautiful thing, and this is what the genius of what it was that Stephen was putting forth, is that the mechanics of the board game sort of give you the or manage the actions, right? It's not you're not so much thinking about, oh, what do I do in the context of an RPG. Like in an RPG, you get into those scenarios, you're like, okay, there's a 20-foot dragon, and what do I have in my bag of holding? Shit, I don't have that thing. And so what do I do, right? Like, and your imagination has to create the actions in a way that can go completely left field, be too weak or whatever, and it can be sort of a limit to the unfolding of the rest of the narrative, right? It's just like how it is that you're coming up. The board game gives you the actions. It tells you exactly what you do at any time, and you have the choices that are to make there are just clear and straight. And so because of that, you should have, especially if you're coming into the game with a level of experience, or not necessarily a high level of experience, but you just know the mechanics of the game, you can sort of do those, not like those are more routine, where the narrative layer that's added on top becomes an aside, like I said, like this aside of like, okay, yeah, I just did that. Now let me think about what's my internal rationale for taking this action. How does it relate to this player? And then I've got to write this little thing. It's gonna be wild.
Oh, that's cool. I wonder if I'm very curious about whether the kind of narrative layer will cause players to behave differently mechanically in the game. Because if you feel attached or connected to someone,
yes,
you're going to treat them differently, even if technically the game is competitive, and you might screw them on a different occasion if you weren't storifying it.
Well, I think that's the part of it that I'm like, the joy of it for me is really just capturing the headcanon of a board game play, right? So you've got your rationale, your strategic thinking in terms of what outcomes you're planning around those. And then I'm basically pulling you aside and say, okay, now translate that into narrative terms. And then we look at the record that's left, and here's the narrative description of what the course of history that we just played out, right? It's, yeah.
This is gonna be cool. No. So, I mean, how much work is this going to require from you, sort of the game master? Are you just going to be kind of watching all of us play and like frantically taking notes about how to translate it? Are you going to be playing yourself?
The archivist is the added role of the name of the game is the company archives, and the whole sort of framework of it is that it's an archivist at a library for the East India Company, right? And they are in essence going through the archives and looking through the archival record, which is the game that's playing out on the table. And what they are, the dream, the archivist dream is the name of the event. The dream aspect of it is, imagine if you're the archivist and you realize this historical thing has happened, and you can say, oh, where's that letter from the chair to the wife of the military, the head of the military, right? And you pull it out of the record, and there it is, this letter. And so that's what the players are going to be writing, those letters. And the archivist is going to be collecting all of the letters and basically trying to put together the archival record for this playthrough of the game.
I'm really ready for this, honestly. Yeah, you've got me like, I was already excited about my first Gen Con, and now I'm like, oh, this is going to be a fantastic Gen Con.
I'm so excited. It's one of those once in a lifetime experience. A large part of like what shaped who I am overall is early exposure to performance art. And I don't know if you've ever seen like performance artists, and this is like across the board, like going from the performance arts on the subway train to like, internationally renowned performance artists showing up at random festivals doing absurdity or culturally thoughtful absurdity, right? I just love building experiences, which is what performance art is all about, creating an experience that's going to be taken. And so this is going to be quite the experience.
That's That's fantastic. Actually, speaking of performance art, I was kind of reflecting on this as you were talking. You know, a lot of design energy is clearly going into this, and I'm super excited to play it.
Mm-hmm.
I also feel like, especially because I just took a job in the game industry, you know, I think a lot of people think about games in terms of selling them, or at
Mm-hmm.
least getting them published and making sure a wide audience sees them.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't really seem like it's a concern for you in the same way. Like you're willing to put that energy into something that's a one-off, something that may never be published. What drives you as a game creator,
Mm-hmm.
and how do you decide whether you're trying to get it published through GMT or something like that versus this is just I just want to do it?
That's a good question. I think like in the first part of the question, it's just inherently a part of who I am. And that sounds like a big cop out, but like literally you can, if you talk to my kids, they'll tell you like I've been creating these experiences for their whole lives of just like, I just want to create this moment, or I just want to make this thing that you're going to reflect and have all these questions and instill this level of conversation. And it goes back again, like I said, to early years of performance art, of just like graffiti, you know, like tagging up on the street, like, and like I was one of the like I sucked at graffiti. Let me just get this very absolutely clear. I was horrible. Okay.
But you tried, okay?
like I just didn't have that's not where my talents lie. But I was definitely a part, you know, I was definitely had my little fat caps and was going up and tagging up everywhere that I could. And at some point, even during that, it was just like, oh, I can leave a message on the wall, you know, and like that's art. I'm gonna leave some messages on the wall, right? And that's gonna create an experience, right? Like, what is that message on the wall that you're gonna leave, right? What is that really about? It's not necessarily, there's the part of it like, oh, that looks great for me. And there's the part of it like, oh, I can take a picture of this and share it with others. But then there's the other part of it of like, oh, how many people are going to encounter this thing? And what's the experience that it's going to give them? What is the reaction that it's going to give them? And that being able to sort of curate experiences for people in that way has been a part of like who I am from the core. So like games became sort of the medium, like coalesced into this medium where I could channel that energy in a cohesive manner, as opposed to just trust me, don't worry, it's gonna work out. You know, like, oh, let me give some rules that you can read on your own and figure it out if it's gonna work or not, right? But it became a way for me to sort of do that. And I've got like, I literally have probably a list of 30 to 40 games that I'm working on, to be honest, or that are at some level of design, right? And I prioritize around those, mostly around what's the thing that I want to go the deepest on. Because for me, like there are a few games that like I've designed this thing in a day or two, like, oh yeah, and this is gonna work. And then that's just sort of at that mechanical level, and I may have an idea on like the top level of like, oh, this is what I want it to be doing, and then but it just sort of sits because I want to go deeper to be able to make sure that the mechanics that I've come up with can convey the type of experience that I'm trying to create with it. And so the priority is usually around like, what is it that I'm going the deepest on right now? And then now that I've sort of got this sort of publishing swing going, it's interspersed with getting the work done to complete a publishing cycle, right? And so, but not all of them, like I wouldn't have 30 or 40 designs if I thought they were all going to be published, because that's absolutely silly, right? You know, I mean, now
Well, you just be David.
to be perfectly honest, there are a lot of designers that have hundreds of games that they have published, and some of them are among the greats, right? But I don't think that, I'm not being arrogant enough to think that, oh, everything that I'm going to design is going to get published, or everything that I'm designed is to be published. Again, like I said, a lot of times it's really a matter of, can I create this experience? And sometimes you do the play test and you have the play test and that experience is there and you're like, that was great. Never need to do that again. You know? And it goes on the show.
So it kind of sounds like for you, I guess maybe games are like the way you like to talk to people or get them to talk to you.
There you go. That I love that. Yeah. Games are the means for my conversation because yeah. I think that it sort of provides ground. I don't want to say rules because it's different from the rules, but guardrails for having deeper conversations about things that you don't typically have conversations about, you know? Or even if you do have conversations, they end up being at the surface level. There's nothing like coming out of a game and reflecting upon, like, even if it's like even if you don't always agree with the things that the game has said, but like actually reflecting upon what it was saying, is just an amazing experience.
That is a cool way to think about it. It actually leads me to the follow-on question too. So
Mm-hmm.
you design a lot of games that are different styles
Mm-hmm.
and for different play counts.
Mm-hmm.
So do you feel conversationally different when you're making a game that's say like a solo game like Ortona versus something where the players are actively helping to create the conversation, like what we're going to do at Gen Con?
Mm-hmm.
Like what kind of conversation are you having at different player counts and these different styles? Do you see them as different, or is it just variations on a large theme?
I would say definitely it's a variations on a large theme, but I try and design games for the like player count that's going to communicate the idea, that's going to build the conversation correctly, right? And so like Ortona's Solitaire, but the World War one is 2-player, right? And the rationale before that is because of the two varied positions of the Germans in both games. On the World War One game, there is a level of what the Germans are doing that it's worth sort of saying, okay, what were the Germans doing versus, okay, what were the French doing? In the Ortona one, what the Germans are doing is they're on the defense, and they're on the defense in such a way, they're on an aggressive type of defense that is better reflected for a player through a different lens. But in the context of Ortona, it's much easier to think about that position because of what it is that they're tactically doing being represented as bot actions than being represented as player actions. And so for that reason, it's more appropriate to have it as a solitaire game. When I'm thinking about multiplayer, it's all about, okay, what's the interactions that I want to have between players? What's the table talk that I want to see going on? That's like the best part. Like when the thing that I love the most about watching sessions of Cross Bronx Expressway is just the affirmation through table talk. Like you get to a point in the game where there's a negotiation going on and you're like, oh, my friend, if you only knew how historical you're being right now. But it's the mechanics that have sort of pulled it out of you. And that's the experience that I'm trying to create, you know? And so, yeah, the play count to me is secondary to what's the history, the historical context that I want to provide players. And then it's like the question of, okay, how many players can I provide this for, right?
Yeah, I think I also asked because, I mean, I think the stereotypes are slowly dying, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
But when people think about solo gaming, they're like, what do you mean a conversation? There's no one to talk to. There's no table talk. Do you feel like just by playing your game, somebody has kind of gotten to know you in a way? It's sort of a one-sided exchange emotionally and in terms of interaction. But how do you interact with someone when there's no table talk?
I think in a solitaire game, it's really about learning how you interact with yourself. And I'm going to go away from my own game for a second and just talk about this because I've been thinking about this since last night, right? Last night, I played a session of Earthborn Rangers solo. I've played it with multiple multiplayer as well, but I've also got this solo campaign that I'm running for myself. And hands down, Earthborn Rangers was my top game of 2023. Absolutely. And I'm still in love with it. And last night, I think I came to part of the realization of like what it was that I loved about this game, or why this game touched me in the way that it touched me. And I think I before we started recording, I told you, Liz, that I'm very sort of fragile right now, and I'm going to say stuff. So this is going to get really like into who NB is, but I I I had a long relationship with being with outdoors, and even when like we lived in the Bronx, as a kid, we would go like up to Bear Mountain, and I go hiking up there, and anyway, like yeah, a lot of outdoors. Later on in life, like went heavy into outdoors life. Lots of hiking, traveled the world. Everywhere that I would go on hiking trips and like try and see as much as possible, explore as much as possible, and just like bask in the glory of the nature and outdoors. And around, I want to say like 7 or 8 years ago, before the pandemic, I got Lyme disease.
Whoa.
And it like really like did a trip on me, and has completely like, it's one of those things. This is like, I'm a human being and fragile, all those things. It's one of those things that, you know, you hear other stories, and you may have other stories, or people may know stories of people that like similar situation just bounced back and said, I'm just going to get back into it and it's going to be all the same, or like that resilience. And I just couldn't. Well, I just physically, it did something to me physically. And Lyme is a really touchy topic. It's kind of like COVID, like where people don't want to talk about the actual effects of it, or there's a lot of denial about what it does. And I can only talk about from my own experience. I'm not trying to say anything, but I've been at like 60 to 70% since, right?
Damn.
And deal with a whole bunch of other things. And so being like this happened over 30 years into my life. I'm not gonna say how this is like well into my life, right? And where, like I said, I've had this long relationship and I just could not do it anymore. And not even that I couldn't do it anymore. It just wasn't the same. That should be the thing. It's like I'm just so much more cautious. I'm so much more like not carefree, that it completely changed my relationship with nature, right?
Yeah.
And what Earthborn Rangers did was remind me like about that carefree wonder and the joy that like just being provides, you know? Like in Earthborn Rangers, there's a lot going on, don't mind, but like for sure. But like there's just like those moments where you could just sit back and watch nature unfold. And that was so much like I would go to Costa Rica, point at a mountain and say, I'm gonna climb that mountain today. Go to the top and just sit up there and watch the howler monkeys, you know, have a feast, you know, like that was the type of love and life that I had, right? And not, I'm being hyperbolic, but I did that. That is not a fake experience, but it's not like every day in my life it's like that. But and so
no, but it's the sort of thing you would do.
Yes, exactly. It's the type of thing that I would do, right? And so seeing that reflected in a game is just like, it brought back all of this emotional things. It's so well reflected through the mechanics, even as you came to these points of conflict, right? It was just like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe that they did this. And so the session that I had last night, which I've been reflecting on, was really hard. And it made me reflect on this position where I've been in, which is like, I'm just not going to be able to do as much as I want to do. So I came into the session like, yeah, maybe I'll try and travel 3-4 stops to try and make my progression towards this mission. And it became clear really quickly that I was going to struggle to travel one. And at first I was like, oh, is this really what I want to do right now? Like, am I really prepared for this right now? I just wanted to like do some quick floating around and exploring and looking at people. And this is, I was actually in one of the major towns. And so it was a place where I was like, oh, I'll start out just like looking at people here, figuring out some of that part, and then move on and trying to do these 3 other stops. And like I said, immediately it's just like, oh crap, this is going to be a challenge. And all of my focus had to turn to just being able to survive to get out of the town, like being able to not take on another injury to get out of the town. And that level of effort, it was rewarding at the end, but not rewarding in the woohoo, but rewarding in the, yeah, I stuck with it and I got through. I stuck with it and I got through. Now, there's some like layer or some level of the gaming hobby that says, oh, that's a bad experience. It wasn't, there wasn't enough positive feedback. And like, and I'm like, nah, this is like, that's the level of engagement with self that I really like with games, and engagement with other players that go that deep. I also love with games. Whew, sorry.
Nah, and in a lot of ways, I actually feel like that's like the perfect solo gaming experience.
Yes, exactly. Reflection on self. So yeah, as I think the question was around what is the conversation, and it's really a conversation of like, are you cheating? Are you gonna cheat right now? Okay, go ahead. That's okay. Nobody's looking at you. How far is it gonna get you then?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, if it's going to get you far, then go for it, because nobody's like,
yeah, maybe that's what you need to do right now. Like to move the narrative forward, you need to like flip those die over a bit, and just keep going. Right. But that is also a reflection on like where you're trying to get and what it is that you're trying to do and the experience that you're trying to have.
Man, I have not played Earthborn or yet, but I'm now really glad that I backed that second printing.
I can't wait for the expansion stuff. It's going to be amazing. Yeah, that was one of like when we were at PAX, one of the other people that I wanted to go up to was to go to them, and I actually bought my copy there because I hadn't backed it. And I'll tell you this, I hadn't backed it because I really wasn't sure it was possible. And I felt really sad afterwards, like, oh man, I should have supported because they actually did it. I thought like their dream of what they wanted to do was just too lofty. I'm like, this is board games, y'all. What are y'all doing over here? Right. And so as soon as like I was like, oh, you guys proved me wrong, I went over there and put the cash in their hand with them, and took my copy. I'm so thankful that they have done what they've done.
Fantastic. Yeah. That's awesome. Hey, it's capitalism is an act of faith.
Yes, it is.
Oh man, that's what? I actually kind of feel like that's a good spot to conclude this. Any immediate news for your game stuff or places where you'd like to be found online? I know you don't want to be found in real life.
I mean, yeah, I'm on the Bot Factory. If you want to go check out NBSP1618 on the Bot Factory, and then NBSP1618.games is the place where I rarely put, but sometimes, more times than I thought, put some updates on what's going on.
Fantastic. And I will be hoping for Cross Bronx Expressway to appear soon. Yep. And for all your other projects in progress to also appear soon, at least relatively.
Yeah, we'll get there. Point is to get it all going so they all have their way out.
And B, thank you so much. I'm so glad that I had you back on. And
yes, sure.
It's very appreciated. We should do, I'm going to do some sort of follow-up about this John Company game.
Awesome. I'm really excited for it. We're going to have a great time with this.
Absolutely. All right, everybody out there, thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.